Right, so we've just hooked a bigger fish now. Not sure what this is, but it's on the light rig. I think it could be one of these barbel. And it's definitely setting off into the middle of the dam. This could be one of those where I take quite a while playing it. Say we're only on number 6 elastic here. So this fish has come pretty much after the first sort of 45 minutes of feeding. So it'll be a bit of a test to see if we can get this in, because they do run to a good size in here. We're having to put extra sections on as well. I'm also having to dodge a bit of line that's been caught in the tree from the previous angler, which doesn't help. We'll try and clear that. As you can see, the problem is with it being so deep here. The fish can basically go as far down in the lake as it wants. Get out of there. Right, so we've just had a barbel on. As you can see, I'm changing the hook length now because unfortunately he's ended up just doing us on some tree branches down to the left-hand side there. So a bit of a shame, but as I say, it's a bit of a stretch landing them when you've got 095 hook lengths and that sort of gear on. So we're going to go onto the worm rig now. I say I fairly well had that fish beat, but he's just ended up nicking the hook length on a bit of sort of tree branch or rock or whatever it was down to my left hand side, so it's a bit of a shame. But like I say, what we'll do now is we'll switch onto the worm rig and just see if there's half a chance of there being another one down there. So again, this is slightly more stepped up, a better hook length on it. As I say, number 8 elastic, so I should be able to bully the fish a bit more. But I'm very surprised took a barbel that early into the session. As I say, that'd have probably been our 10th or 11th fish, something like that. So with this, I'm going to lay the rig out and then just drag the bulk, like I say, over the left-hand marker. And then just drop the float over the top and keep it on a tight line, just to let that worm swing into the shelf. Again, it's lovely to see the barbel in clear water like that when you're playing them. But it's incredibly difficult to land them. I mean, I've had that one on for best part of sort of 15 minutes there. So nearly had it beat, but it's just ended up taking one last run and going down my left-hand edge and, like I say, just nicking the hook length, unfortunately. I think otherwise we'd have got him in. So again, I'll probably only give it sort of 5 or 6 minutes on this worm rig, just purely based on the fact that I was catching so quick on the rig with single maggot. So again, keeping that shallow line fed. I think after that barbel charge through it, it might have upset whatever was there, so I want to keep the bait going in and keep them in the area. So biting a fish on the worm. surprisingly, it's a nice stamp roach. Been quite surprised to catch that on the worm rig. I was half expecting a perch that time. So I'm just going to tip that hook bait with a fluoro pinky as well, just to make sure the worm can't double over the hook point. And as ever when we're fishing with worms, I just let the bite develop for a little bit longer as well. Especially if there's decent quality perch in the peg, I just want to make sure they've got the bait down, because you can get a lot of small perch sort of having a go at the bait rather than taking it properly. So we'll keep feeding that shallow line, and then hopefully we'll see if we can catch a better fish on the worm as well. Right, so we're just over an hour into the session now, and I'm going to top up the ground bait line. We've had a bit of a go on the worm. We've had a few small perch. We had that roach that we got on camera as well. But I think it's probably worth topping it up now, considering how many fish are down there. I want to keep them interested. So I've just put plenty of chopped worm in. Like I say, I'm just cupping it in as we were when we started. A few mica pellets, a few dead maggots, plenty of hemp as well. So a good amount of feed for the fish that are down there. So what I'm going to do as well is, because I've put that ball in now, I want to let the fish settle on it. So I'm going to pick up my shallow rig, seeing as I've been feeding for the best part of an hour now. I'm going to pick up the 7-foot rig and give that a go. Again, because it's warmed up as the day's gone on a little bit as well, hopefully that'll bring them onto the shallow line a bit easier, so I won't have to drag them up off the bottom. So for my shallow fishing, I'm going to start at the end of my 10-metre section, but with the 11.5 behind me, just in case I think the fish are backing off the feed, or it just allows me to explore around my feed area a little bit. There's an indication straight away there. There we go, that's the fish on the shallow rig straight away. And surprisingly, the perch are even up at that depth. I was expecting it to be roach on that line, to be fair. But seeing as though I had an indication as that was falling, it tells me that there might be a few fish above this depth, so I can then look to pick up the 4-foot rig. And certainly if I feel like the eider are present in the peg, that's when I'll switch to the 4-foot rig, because they tend to feed shallower than the roach. So again, I'm just laying that rig out, holding it on a nice tight line. And again, the premise of doing that with these carbon stem floats is I can see at what angle the float is. That'll tell me at what depth the fish are taking the bait. Just had another bite there. So that bite seemed to be around sort of the 5-foot of depth mark. So with the shallow feeding, another bite again. What I'm doing is I'm not feeding a ton of bait, but I am feeding very regularly. Again, because of the depth, there's no chance of me fishing on the bottom underneath all the maggots, so I want effectively all the maggots that I'm feeding to be eaten within sort of the top 6, 7, 8 feet of water, really. It's another bite much shallower that time, so I'm going to switch straight away onto the shallower rig. So I've missed 3 bites there, and whenever you're shallow fishing, if you're missing bites, the odds are that's because the fish are sat shallower than what you're fishing, so there's too much slack line. So again, I'm pretty much fishing fluoro maggot on the hook on most of my, in most circumstances, just a single maggot. I think that's probably the best all-round bait on here. So we'll see if we get a bite at 4 foot. If not, then I can always shallow up the 7 foot rig and take that down to sort of 5.5 and just fish a slightly longer line. There we go, that's biting a fish on straight away. This feels like a better fish actually. Looks like an hide. Again, with the number 5 elastic, it's nice and light, so the fish isn't turning and flashing too much in the water. And that's brilliant that we're getting into the bonus fish early. I say that and he's decided to suddenly go nuts in the peg. And just taking it really careful because we're only on light gear and small hooks. I've only got size 20 hooks on here. And there we go, that's the first bonus fish of the session landed. Lovely stamp-eyed. Again, I feel with these, the longer that you can feed your line, that gives them a chance to gain confidence and come in and feed. It's really lightly hooked right in the top lip. Beautiful stamp fish. Again, they look like they've barely seen a hook. So we'll get him popped back and hopefully there'll be a couple more down there to be caught. Right, so we've just slipped that hide back. And we're going to get back out there and see if there's another. I'd be very surprised if we get one straight away, being that in the end he did decide to go a little bit nuts in the peg, so quite often they will spook the other fish. But I suspect it was the hide that was giving us the missed bites. So because he's gone a bit nuts in the peg, I'm just going to go a little bit further out past the feed. Again, by having these 2 lines, it allows me to rotate them. So I think for the hide coming into the peg, that's what gives them the confidence is, well, there we go, that's another fish on now. He's just giving them the time to get their confidence up and feed. Not sure what this is because it's fighting a bit differently. Looks like a nice stamp roach actually, you can see them turning in the peg. It looks like I've guessed that wrong, it's a nice perch. Very surprising when you think that those have come up in the water in, well, when you're plumbing up there, it's probably the best part of 20 feet deep. Lovely nice bite and another nice stamp silverfish. So I'm quite surprised today how much higher up the fish are feeding than I expected. So I thought we'd be catching them shallow at about 6 feet with the brightness and obviously with the disturbance of us fishing on the bank here and being on camera. It looks like it's fishing really well actually. There we go, that's another fish shallow. There we go, another nice stamp perch. I'm quite surprised so far that we've not had a roach shallow. We've had 3 perch and an hide. As I say, previously when I fished on here and fished shallow, it seems like the roach prefer to sit that little bit deeper, but if there's perch and an hide sat above them, obviously then we're just risking missing bites on that. You can see as soon as we've changed the depth of the rig to 4 foot, we haven't missed a single bite, so that's been 3 in 3 chucks. So again, when I'm loose feed, I'm trying to keep all the loose feed short of the pole tip. Let's say if the odd one does drift past, then I've still got that 11.5 metre section behind me to go to the full extent of my feed area. Again, when I'm shallow fishing on here, I don't tend to sit on it for too long, I think, because again of the clarity of the water and the disturbance of when you're catching them. I think it's very easy for them to spook, so I prefer to sort of fish for maybe half an hour, have a good run shallow, and then go back onto the ground bait line. So like I say, all the while I'm fishing this, the ground bait is settling on that other line. I'm just seeing hide now drifting through the peg again. I'm just going to lay the rig into him. So I say that ground bait's just settling now. So hopefully when I get the fish, or go back to fishing on that, the fish should just be sat nice and hard on the bottom. So it looked like that hide that had just come through the peg then was actually turning for the maggots, so it might well have been feeding. Again, with having this lovely clear water, you can actually see the fish, so it gives you an idea of what's in your peg, especially if they sat quite shallow. So it might be the case that with this, if the hide are in the peg for a bit longer, I might shallow this down to 2 foot and have a longer line so I can effectively swing the rig at them. Again, as they come shallower and shallower, that's when they're more likely to be spooked by the pole. So we'll keep feeding this, see if we can snare another. And like I say, the next change will be going back onto the ground bait line. Right, so I think we're just about to come up to another changeover now. So we've had a good run of fish and we've had a few perch, plenty of bites now shallow, but I'm missing the odd bite now, even at 3.5 foot deep. So I think what we'll do is we'll switch back to the ground bait line. That's had a good half hour to settle now. And that'll hopefully just allow me to keep plenty of loose feed going in on this shallow line, and hopefully that'll get the fish's confidence back. And also I think by doing that it gives me a better chance of catching the hide as well. Certainly the hide in here can be very spooky, and once you've had one and then you start catching a few small fish, they very rarely come back unless you come off the line. So that's going to be my plan of attack. And you can see some tiny little indications. These indications that I'm getting as well, it's worth noting, they're not as the rig's sort of half depth as it's falling through, they're pretty much as it's coming towards its settling depth. So that's telling me that the fish have just become a bit more wary. Same again there. As if it was a case of the fish are shallower, then I'll be able to read that on the bristle. Like I said, we'll try and catch one more, if we can actually hit one of the bites. And then we'll come off this line and go onto the ground bait. But considering we've been fishing for probably just over an hour and a half at this point, we've had a fantastic start. We've probably had 20-25 fish, including one really nice stamp hide. There we go, so that's another fish shallow. It's a nice stamp roach. So finally these have come up and started feeding shallow. Lovely stamp fish, nice little chunky chunky roach there. So like I say, now that we've had a good run on there and the bites have started going a bit funny, I'll just leave the hook baited just in case I see an hide come back in and I can have a quick go for it. But we'll switch back onto the ground bait line now and see if some fish have settled on that. Right, so we've just hooked a nice stamp fish now on that ground bait line. It looks like a nice roach. So that was just taken on a single maggot tip with a fluoro pinky. It's not the best piece of netting you'll ever see. There we go, he's in the bag, and while I've been playing that fish, I've seen a couple of hide as well over the shallow line. So I think we might have a quick change onto the shallow rig to have a look, but that's a clonking roach. Beautiful stamp, and again, like I said earlier, it looks like some of these have never seen a hook before. Lovely stamp fish, that. So I'll get this rig back out on the ground bait line. I'll just keep an eye on that shallow line and see if the hide come back. Again, that roach has just sort of gone through the peg a little bit there. So it might have just put them off briefly, but it looks like we might have a few better stamp fish feeding on that shallow line now as well. So whether fishing a slightly different hook bait on this ground bait line's made a difference, I'm not sure, but since we went back on it, we've had a good run of small perch and roach as well. So the fish are definitely nicely settled on it, but again, it won't be long before I put another top-up feed over the top of it, especially if I'm going to go back on that shallow line. So there we go, bite as soon as it's settled again. So you can see, if you get your feeding and rigs right on these kind of venues, just how productive they can be. It's a nice little perch this time. Again, the last run of fish we've had's pretty much been a bite of chuck. So that's one of the smaller perch that time. That bait looks all right for another fish. So I think what I'll do is, as soon as I see that I'm getting sort of fewer bites, or the regularity of bites on this ground bait line's less, then that's when I'll top it up and go back onto the shallow line. As I say, I'm not rushing to get back on that shallow line, because I think the more time I give it, the more bait that goes in, the more confident the fish will be to feed. So we'll see if we can have a couple more on the ground bait line. And like I say, if the shallow line looks like it's going to be productive again, then we'll make that switch back to it. Right, so we've just hooked another fish shallow now. Just been feeding it for probably about 40-45 minutes, something like that, after we went onto the ground bait line. Had a couple of small fish, and then we've just had this, which looks like another nice hide, if not a chub. So I'm just playing it very carefully, because we're obviously only on light gear. It looks like another hide. So we've got the puller kit, but just taking it nice and steady. And obviously we're only on a nice light number 5's elastic, so just got to take it slow. He's just seen the net again. Again, these are the bonus fish that we were on about earlier. Again, I saw a couple come into the peg and then fished it for a short while. Didn't see them again coming up for the maggots, and suddenly it's gone under and we've hooked one. And there we go, that's the second bonus fish of the day. See, hooked right in the corner of his mouth. Another cracking stamp-eyed, beautiful fish. We'll just pop the hook out and then we'll get him in the keep net. So after we've had that eyed, what we'll do is we'll rest that shallow line. Again, like we said earlier, just keep coming off it every so often, keep it fed. Let the fish get their confidence back up. And then we'll just switch on to the ground bait line in the meantime. Right, so we've just hooked another big fish now on the light rig. Could be another barbel this, so we'll have to see how it plays out. Again, we've had a good run of small fish on this line. Topped it up probably about half an hour or so ago. Had a run of fish and then this one's just gone under now. And I might be wrong, it might not be a barbel, but we'll see what it is. And this time I just laid the rig into the right hand side, so into the shelf a bit, so I was about half an inch over depth and the float's just buried straight away. Funnily enough, it's not fighting like a barbel, it could be an eyed potentially. But as we know, I'm pretty hopeless at guessing what fish I've got on the end. Again, if we get this one in, this will be the third bonus fish of the session. So hopefully we can land him. And I've not seen the fish as yet. I'm just going to have to stand up so I can try and steer him away from any obstacles. It looks like a small barbel, so I was wrong second guessing it. It certainly didn't look like the look of the net. And the problem is with fishing like gear like this for the roach and perch, as I say, if you hook these sort of fish, they can be a bit of a nightmare to get in. Just when I thought I had him beaten, he's not a massive fish. I think we'll have to add another section just to make sure I can keep him up. And every time you seem to get them to the surface, they just make another dive. And there we go, we've got him in the net. Lovely bonus fish, that. So it's certainly not as big as the first one that we hooked, but at least we've got one out. Again, just taken on a single maggot tip with a fluoro pinky. We'll just slip the hook out of him. Beautiful fish. See, stunning condition, quite unusual to catch these on still waters, but more than welcome today. So we'll pop the rig out of the way and get him slipped in the net. There you go, it's recovered perfectly. Right, so we're into the last sort of 5-10 minutes of the session now, so just going to go back on this ground bait line and see if we can catch a couple of fish to end on. Just going same again with a single fluoro maggot. We probably topped it up about an hour or so ago, something like that, with just another couple of mounds of ground bait went in. Again, plenty of empen casters. Main idea thinking that it's getting towards the end of the day, so hopefully there's a fish straight away. Hopefully there'll be a few better roach feeding late, something like that, maybe even the chance of a barbel. There we go, there's a nice stamp roach. So in terms of the session today, it's pretty much played out how we hoped. As in, we've started off on the ground bait line for a quick look on the strung rig, picking off the odd fish that was sat over the ground bait or sat in the cloud of the ground bait that we fed initially. Then quickly, once they've settled, we've gone onto the 1 gram pencil rig, which is the one that we've ended up fishing probably for the most part of the day, really, aside from the shallow fishing. We've had a fair few fish on that. Like I say, we had a good run for probably the best part of 45 minutes, and that's given us the chance to feed the shallow line. But when we've gone on it, we've ended up catching a couple of eyed off it, and plenty of roach and some nice damp perch as well, which is quite a surprise, fishing between 4 and 6 or 7 feet deep. So we've changed those rigs around a little bit, rotated between them, so as the fish have dropped down, it's got brighter. That's when we've gone onto the deeper rig and kept on catching, and when it's become a bit more overcast or ripples come onto the lake, that's when we've gone onto the 4-foot rig and caught. And every so often we've had a look on the ground bait line with the worm rig. We've had a few decent stamp perch on the worm, but again, it's not really produced as consistently as the 1 gram rig fishing with a single maggot. So in all fairness today, we've caught them on every rig we've set up bar the 1.25 gram bodied float, purely because I didn't need to have that fall through the water to get the bites. Like I say, I was catching on this 1 gram rig, so the 1 1/4 just wasn't needed. Like I say, we've put a good stamp of fish together today. Like I say, mainly perch, a few roach with a couple of nice stamp ones, probably about 6-7 ounce a piece. We've had that 1 small barbel, we've lost 1 as well, and we've had 2 eyed, so it's been a very productive day. Like I say, we've had to chop and change to keep the fish coming. Again, as the day's worn on, they've sort of gone a bit more wary and harder to catch, so we've had to rotate the lines even more. But by just having those 2 different lines, 2 different approaches, topping up one, resting it, going on the other for a bit, we've been able to keep fish coming all day. So hopefully, if we're lucky, we'll snare 1 more fish, maybe a perch or a roach if we're lucky, to finish up on. As you can see as well, through the course of the day, the weather's been changeable. We've had a brief bit of rain, but we've also had a fair period of the day where it's been very sunny, which that's what's really affected the shallow fishing. So like I say, when that sun's come up and we've had a few on the 7-foot shallow rig, eventually those fish have backed off, and that's when we've gone back onto the ground bait. So like I say, we'll try and catch 1 fish to end on, and then we'll call it a day at that. And there we go, that's the fish on now. So like I say, I think we'll call this the last one of the session. It's been a nice day's fishing, and hopefully there's plenty of tips and tricks in there regarding fishing these sort of difficult, clear, natural venues. Like I say, smallest perch of the day, we'll call that the last fish of the session, but hopefully there's been a few tips and tricks in there. Like I say, we'll get the net out in a second and show you what we've caught. Right, so as you can see, that's our final net of fish there. There's easily double figures, if not nudging 20 pound all in all. It's been a fantastic day's sport here at Willow Hall Dam. As you can see, a couple of nice eyed in there as the bonus fish, and a nice little barbel as well, but the bulk of the fish have been nice stamp roach and a few sort of dumpy perch, like that kind of size. Again, all taken on 2 lines today, 1 shallow line out into the lake a little bit, and 1 on the ground bait. As I say, we've chopped and changed through the day to keep the fish coming, but that's a belting net of fish in there. Like I say, really happy with that today. Target weight today was sort of about £10, but we've easily smashed that with best part of 15, if not, I say, feeling that nearer £20. So it's been a cracking session here. Hopefully there's a few tips and tricks in there that you can relate to local sort of venues a bit like this, where they're a bit tricky, deep venues, clear water and tough conditions. And hopefully you can put a few fish in the net like we have done today. So as always from Last Cast, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on that next episode.